Hey everybody, welcome back to the MLB Draft Podcast. I'm your host, former MLB pitcher and certified private wealth advisor, Travis Chick, and I'm joined by one of our newest partners today, Will McGuffey. Today, we are going to highlight some of the key financial topics we are hearing from draft families when out in the field. But before we get into that, Will, I'm sure you saw that Baseball America just put out the recent projection for this year's draft. Given some of the conversations that we've had, especially with prior podcast guests, what were your thoughts on that update?
I think the amazing thing is you start to look at the movement up and down by players as seasons start, as guys are hurt, and it's funny, there's some guys that move down and they haven't even played a game because they play in the Midwest or the Northeast somewhere.
Right.
So it's interesting to see how the movement takes place and what's going on and try to, and also discuss with scouts and teams when you're out at games, like, is there any relevance on that and who's really playing well and then go back and look and see if they're actually in any of these lists.
Yeah, no doubt. And it's, the only certainty that we know about the draft is that Baseball America and Perfect Game and all these other people get it wrong all the time. And the only people that get it right are ultimately the teams because they're the ones writing the checks. So and that's great. So like I said, today we're really going to hit on the major questions that Will and I especially are hearing out in the field as we talk to some of these draft families that are starting to see that the draft is actually a real possibility. And so we want to hit on some of these topics and what you guys should be thinking about with some of these questions that you're probably thinking. One of the ones that we get the most is, how should we be thinking about residency? Some of the kids are asking, should we be buying a car, or is investing in real estate a good idea? And one that we hit on quite a bit in previous podcasts is $1 million actually a good number for me to sign for? And so where I thought we'd start the conversation really is on residency. And so, Will, I know we've talked about this quite a bit in the past. You've obviously had experience both sides of this conversation, being an expert agent and now financial advisor as well. So give me a kind of a checklist on what families should be thinking about as it pertains to residency, especially now with the breakdown of how the draft kind of works and gets paid out.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing about everybody looks at the downside of not having your money sooner with the draft and only getting $100,000 this year and then spreading it out to July of next year and the July after that. The one upside to that is that it does allow you to not have a rushed attempt to start to get the residency in place, have to have some of the questions surrounding the taxes that are taken out. So we do have a little bit of time to actually do that the right way, which I think is, it's one less thing to worry about as the draft, is coming upon us, or there's, as soon as you get drafted, saying, okay, let's figure out the logistics, let's put it in place right now. So I think that's the one major thing that allows, this draft structure allows us to do. So, some of the things that you're going to start to look at is you mentioned, you mentioned buying a car. Well, going back to the car and residency, where should I register the car? How should I do my insurance, driver's license? And the one thing that the players should know is, there isn't a strict checklist saying, hey, you have to do this. It's more of a show us that you actually have an attachment through a number of factors, with there being no outstanding checklist. What are some of the things that you have seen guys do?
Yeah, like where do you work out? Where do you go to church? Things like that.
Yeah. They start to follow along and look at, say, let's see your bank statements and see where you were actually spending money. I mean, you go down somewhere and it's like, yeah, I was a Florida resident, but all your money spent in, Kansas. They're going to look at that a little bit differently.
No doubt. We've actually had clients have their phone records audited to see where the majority of the phone calls are being placed and received from. So I think the good thing about this structure, if there is any, we take the financial part of it out of it for this part of the conversation, really. But the good part is that it makes this decision a lot more proactive rather than reactive, because what happens so often is we see this, oh my gosh, I just got drafted by, pick a team. And then all of a sudden now I'm trying to figure out, okay, do I need to get my residency changed this year? How fast can I do that? And the one advantage now is that only, and I use the term very lightly there, only $100,000 of the ultimate signing bonus is going to be applied to your state's resident. So for example, if you're, in the top 10, 15 picks and you sign for $4, $5, $6 million, realistically, you don't want all of that applied to California if that's where you live, or New York, or some of these other high tax states. So it gives us time for you to get settled in, Find out where your spring training is going to be. Find a place that you actually want to work out and stay in the off season. It allows for a really productive residency conversation rather than a reactive and an emotional conversation to have on the residency stuff.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And the other thing it allows us to do is we get to plan a little bit more. You go back to surrounding yourself with a team of
No doubt.
individuals that understand what you're doing and where you're going to go play. um, with us working in the baseball industry and understanding the career path that you're going to have, it allows us to sit down and say, hey, what's actually plausible for your career? Like, where are you going to be next year and the year after? And how can we, adjust the tax
Right.
plan in advance to make sure that everything matches up so we can maximize what you're saving and minimize what you're paying to some of these states.
Yeah, no doubt. We actually have an entire resource that we can send you guys for a residency checklist. It's something that we do every year with our guys, so it'd be something that you guys can check out in the show notes. But I want to move on to one of the things that you hit on was buying a car. So this is obviously an 18-year-old kid, a 21-year-old kid. All of a sudden, it's like, hey, I can afford to buy a really nice car. I can't tell you in the past few years how many Ford Raptors that we've worked with clients on buying, and so it's a really exciting time for players to kind of step out and maybe fulfill their dream of owning whatever type of car it is. Now, whether that's a good decision or a bad decision, at the end of the day, there's two parts of that. Number one, what we always try to advise on, what is the time value of that money, and so we'll get into that conversation we have in previous podcasts. But in terms of buying a car this year, I think it's really helpful to set expectations, because so often these players now, with the way the bonus structure works, is you're going to sign for $100,000, no more, only less if you sign for less, but you're going to get $100,000, and that's going to be before taxes and before agent fees. And so the other part to that too, and we've got into this in previous podcasts, is depending on the language of your contract, could also depend on how much you actually ultimately get taxed in that first year. So last year's draft, we had players ranging their gross amount anywhere between 60 and ironically about $21,000. And so, speaking on buying a car, well, that makes it pretty difficult to buy a car with only $50,000 or $60,000, doesn't it?
Yeah, especially when you think about usually the lack of credit that an individual has, and they're probably not going to get the best rates, the best terms. So, is there a more optimum time to do that if they wait? And do you give yourself, do you
For
put
sure.
yourself in a cash flow crunch if you're going and spending a large amount of your first $100,000 on a vehicle, knowing that you're going to have to put a lot down? So, I think it's always good to just take a
Yeah.
step back and say, hey, man, is this the right car for me now? And will things change? The last thing you want to do, I mean, where guys really get in trouble is they buy one car and they go out and they put $20,000 in modifications on it. And then a year later, they realize, hey, the minor league lifestyle, I'm not really maximizing the utility of my car. I'm not really driving it. I don't enjoy it the way I thought I did, or
Right.
my off season looks a little different. I bought a really nice car, but I want to hunt more. And,
Yeah.
I can't put all my guns or my fishing rods in the back of my BMW car. So, I
Yeah.
think,
Yeah.
waiting and taking a step back is as easy as that is for us to say. It's something you should do to really see what you want and how your life
Yeah.
um, is really going to look.
Well, the reality is, and I can attest to this because I went through this personally. My usership of a car when I was in high school changed dramatically the day that I signed my first professional contract. All of a sudden, now I'm in a season, and rarely did I ever even need my car. But if I did, it was only the only time I had to drive it was to and from the field. So I could have been in a bike and probably got just as much utility out of a car as I did that bicycle. In fact, I did use a bicycle quite a bit. But one of the things, speaking on buying a car, that you hit on just a minute ago that I want to expand on really is credit. Because one of the things that we see most underutilized and least planned for kind of leading into the draft is that credit card experience. And so while we're definitely not advocating go out and get a ton of different credit cards, one of the things that we often see as a big challenge for you guys is when you ultimately do sign, maybe you're there and you need to rent a car. Well, guess what? The first thing that they're going to do is rent and make sure that you can secure it via credit card. Or maybe you need to sign a lease and you have to go back and look at your credit history. And so, let's talk a little bit on credit and why, specifically for baseball players, that's so important.
I think you start to look at, when you are an older person, you're trying to purchase larger things. You're trying to buy a house, you're trying to buy another car, whatever it might be. Everything goes back to your credit history. And the bank basically saying, hey, do we believe this individual can, repay this loan? And it goes back to also your work history.
Right.
The problem is a lot of these guys, a lot of people don't have a credit history of any significance, yet they have
Yeah.
$1 million in the bank, and there's no real way to justify, hey, I'm
Seems
a minor
crazy,
league
right?
player. And it's insane, but we see it happen all the time, especially last year during COVID. We had a number of players that are trying to refinance a
Yeah.
house, and because of lack of income,
Right.
because they aren't on a roster, because roster crunches and guys were released and just waiting to see what happens this year, not able to go back and refinance a house. So you're stuck in a higher mortgage interest rate, which is you're in the 4.5s, where everybody else is sitting there talking about, hey, I'm getting high twos, mid twos. I mean, that's a couple $100 a month, depending on the size of your loan.
Yeah.
So, going back and establishing credit is something that everybody should
Yeah.
do. And the question is, how do you do it?
Yeah, no, it's funny. I literally had that conversation with somebody that was drafted last year. Um, he's a very smart kid, and ironically enough, he had no idea the impact of just a few interest rate points. And so I just kind
Yeah.
of walked him through it, helped educate him. Like, hey, let's say you do go out and you buy a car, and that's a $40,000 car, and your interest rate is 2% or 6%, which is not unrealistic for somebody that doesn't have credit. And I just showed him the different payment amounts that would ultimately lend to. And then two, we walked through a mortgage example, and it was really eye opening for him to see, holy cow, the benefit of good credit really
Yeah.
is a really big driver of what could ultimately be my net worth if I can't afford to pay cash for the car or the house or whatever it is, because of how much interest you're actually going to pay. And so that's something that we always walk through with our guys. We want to make sure that they, number one, have a full and a healthy understanding of what credit is, but then two, how to actually go about acquiring it. And so, kind of leading
Yeah.
into the conversation that I had yesterday, which is really some of the drivers of why we are having this conversation. We want to get this information out to you guys, is centered around the college scholarship plan. So, everybody focuses on my signing bonus, right? But a big partner to that signing bonus is the college education program. And so if you're a potential first round pick, and all of a sudden you're also signed to a Vanderbilt or a Stanford or a Rice or a TCU or one of these really expensive schools, you're also going to get a pretty healthy chunk of change to be able to set aside for your college scholarship, for your college use, right? So, Will, let's hit on that, because this is a really important one that I think is probably the most overlooked part of the actual signing and negotiation process.
Yeah, well, they changed the plan a couple of years ago, and what it did, there were a number of things that are beneficial to players. They expanded where you can use the actual money to go to school, and then also it's a lump sum now. It's not. It used to be more based off of, and teams will still calculate it based off of, hey, you're giving up the experience of going to whatever the university is. The rate of that now is X dollars. Let's multiply that times four. And while that, some people say, well, yeah, that's a valid formula. Is it really? And here's where we see a lot of people not understanding the ramifications of that college scholarship plan. You have two components that aren't accounted for in that. One is education inflation. When you go back and look at the rates of education, higher education, and how much it's changed in a 5-year period or a 10-year period. Don't even, let's not even talk about a 20-year period, because that's a whole different ballgame. But the cost of higher education has continued to rise. So if I get a scholarship and it's worth $20,000 a year based off of where I was going to go to school, it might be $35,000 by the time I actually use it. So I have a built-in deficit. The other thing is that the tax implication. I think this is something you were talking about the other day, and this is a question and answer that people are most astonished by. Is you're taxed on that money as you use it, and so you have to pay taxes. So that $20,000 scholarship that you had, and you're going to try to pay for a $35,000 school, it's really only worth, let's say, $14,000 to you. And that's where people get caught in this trap of, oh, well, school is covered when it can be covered. But one of the ways that you might do that is say, hey, look, guys, we know it's changed to a lump sum. So let's go ahead and just negotiate, 40% more than what the university I want to go to is, to try to capture some of those losses you're going to have if you end up using it.
Well, no, no, and I think to expand on that a little bit, I mean, especially now with the way that you guys are going to get paid out, you get $100,000 this year, and then the remainder spread out 50% over the next 2 years. Those are those are different tax rates in those each one of those years. And so the first year, obviously, it's going to be a pretty low tax rate. The next 2 years, a really high tax rate, and then depending on if you're still in the minor leagues, that fourth year, it's probably going to be back at that low tax rate. And so this comes into timing when you actually even want to use this college scholarship, because if you do go back to school while you're still playing and you have 50,000 aside for this college scholarship, but you made $1 million this year, well, guess what? Now that $50,000 turns into more like 25 or 30. So it's very impactful. And it's just something that it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just something that, number one, we need to plan for. And number two, I think you hit the nail on the head talking about the inflation of education costs, because if I'm planning on needing $200,000 in today's dollars to go to school, but I'm also planning on playing for at least 4, 5, 6 years, let's future value that out to see what the cost would actually be in 5 or 6 years. And that's the number that we should probably be settling on. And that doesn't even include the taxes. It gets really complicated. But the message that I want to stress here is be as proactive as possible. Waiting until after the draft, waiting until after you sign to have these numbers as leverage, as ammunition to negotiate against a team is really just bad planning. What do you think, Will? Is anything else I'm missing on the college stuff?
No, I mean, when you talk about the negotiations going for the college scholarship plan money, it's usually, or the CEP as it is now, it's not the CSP, it's the CEP. But that's on the backside. Everybody just basically says, hey, yeah, we know that's going to be included. Everybody's worried about that signing bonus number first. And then we're going to go ahead and knock out the dollars on the backside. So it's something that you should already prepare for, have written down, understand the cost of what you're giving up. And that way, whoever your advisor is, or if you're handling it on your own, you're walking in there and saying, hey, I'm going to ask for, I know the cost of the university that I am signed at, or the university that I'm at is $100,000. But I also understand that, in the past 10 years, the cost of going to that institution has grown by 45%. And I also know I'm going to be taxed on that. So instead of asking for $100,000, I'm going to ask for $150,000. And here's the reasons why. And it makes it harder. We're not saying the teams are going to say yes to it, but it makes it harder for the teams to say no if you back it up with logic instead of just throwing numbers, at the wall and saying, hey, we hope this sticks.
Well, I think it just shows that you're actually prepared. One of the conversations that we've had with some of the scouts is they want to know that you want to do this. And it's funny, some of the language that has been used by some of the agents and advisors is that you don't want the teams to know that you want to do this, but it just shows that you're prepared. And I think that there's a lot of respect around
Yeah.
a prepared person on and off the field. But then the last thing I really want to hit on today
Well,
is,
it's like we were talking to
we've heard it time and time again. Go ahead. Sorry.
we were talking to CJ Ebar a couple weeks ago about
Yeah.
this. And that's one of the things that the teams are trying to figure out is they're sitting there saying, hey, is this guy prepared? Is he willing to do this? This is a lifestyle change.
Right.
We want to know that this guy is a professional and not that he's just dipping his toes in the water. So I think if these families are walking in and clearly understand what they want and have a reasoning for it, instead of it being a negative of, oh, he doesn't want a school, it's more of a positive of, hey, this guy is a legitimate professional. He's going to walk in here, know what he wants to do, and he's going to go after it.
Yep.
And he's not going to get blindsided by anything. He prepares the right way. So I think it's really a positive to go out there.
No
And
doubt.
you don't tell teams, hey, I'm going one direction or another. But I think you just say, hey, look, I'm prepared to go one direction or another. And, either
Well,
direction,
you learned
you're
that as
still
an
coming
agent,
out
didn't
looking
you?
like a professional. Oh, yeah, absolutely. The conversations with some of those guys are hilarious. And CJ Ebar after we got done
Oh,
taping, we
I
were just
bet.
like, hey, we could have gone on about some of the conversations we had and the gamesmanship that we
Oh yeah.
had, but it's just part of the whole process. So what do you think about,
Yeah,
as far
no,
as
it's
signing
fun.
bonuses
It's
and
been fun getting to. Yeah, what I was going to say is it's been
like,
fun getting to hear some of your former stories as an agent because of the conversations that you had on draft days, the conversations that you've had with these scouting directors and negotiating this the amount of money and all this, and it's been fun for me as a third party to kind of sit back and listen. But I want to shift gears to really the biggest conversation piece that people kind of lump us into as investment advisors or whatever, and talking about um, different types of investments. We hear about these oil and gas deals all the time, or we hear about private real estate or venture capital. We hear about all these really, really exciting deals, or timber. I mean, we've heard about that, and so it sounds like it's a really fun investment to make. That we know on our side that the greatest return that you're likely to get in investment is going to come on the private side, but with that comes a ton of risk. And so what we always try to educate our clients on is that there's really four uses of money. One of them we can't control is taxes. They are what they are, right? One that we can control is spending. The other one that we really hope to control is savings and investing, and the final one that we desire to be able to control on is giving. And so importance is probably in that order. Taxes, spending, saving, and investing, especially for a minor league guy, because the reality is, especially in that first year with $100,000, we know you're going to pay taxes. We know you're going to pay your agent fee. We know that you're going to support yourself until you get to that next July when you get that second part of the bonus. And so spending now becomes a very important topic of conversation. Um, After we can kind of control that spending, it gets into investing. And so this is really where we crunch a lot of numbers and make sure that number one, we have what we call the protective reserve set aside. So we view the signing bonus probably a little bit different than the average broker in the house, because when you bring $100,000 into us, the first thing that we want to do is make sure that that money is going to actually be there to help you get to the big leagues. And so, Will, let's talk for a minute. This is where I want to park this conversation. Let's talk for a minute on kind of the uses of money and how important it is to make sure that this signing bonus is intended to help you get to the big leagues.
yeah, I think you hit it on the head when you said we're a little bit different. So we're wealth strategists. We're not the traditional broker. I'm selling you a product. We're just going to invest some money. We're wealth strategists, and we look at the comprehensive wealth structure, portfolio design, career design around what you're doing, and then figure out your priorities, your goals, and say, okay, let's make a plan structured around all of that. And that's how we're different. And once we get into, there's so many layers into that, but it really is. This money is about getting you to the major leagues in a comfortable fashion. And we say comfortable fashion,
Yeah.
don't mean, hey, going out and spending a bunch of money, or hey, it's to really understand money is there to get me to the big leagues and to be a professional baseball player. So I want to invest in myself as well as I want to
Yeah.
invest in other properties. One thing that comes into play is cash
Yeah.
flow crunches. We were talking about it with the car earlier. You start to go look at the types of
Yeah.
investments that you put your money in. Are you locking it up to where you can't access it? And we saw it, there was a number of people last year,
Yeah.
especially with COVID. All of a sudden you're not getting a paycheck. Are you protected in that
Yeah.
scenario to continue going down, doing what you need to do to live the lifestyle of a professional baseball player? And when we say live the lifestyle, we mean train
Right.
right, eat right, do the things that are going to allow you to
Yeah.
maximize your human capital.
Yeah, no, yeah, last year was a great case study in how we ultimately manage the wealth of our clients. Not just on the draft pick side, but on our major league players. They made 37% of their normal salary, and so if we kind of break down those four uses of money again on the $1 million scale, we can kind of go back to see how important it is to control spending, because out of that gate, we know 40% is going to go to taxes. Um, our target savings rate for our major leaguers especially is 40% of their gross earnings. And so that leaves, if you can easily do the math, that leaves only 20% left for the spending and giving. And so everybody's got different giving goals, but everybody also has different spending tendencies. And so we've seen it in real world examples where, hey, if your lifestyle is set up in such a way that it takes you this amount of money every year to live on to maximize your human capital to be able to be a major leaguer. Like if you come to me and you say, "Hey, Travis, I need to buy this meal delivery service because I've tested the macros and trust me, we get in these conversations." That is an investment in yourself, and so that's number one where I would
Yeah.
say you need to go do that. I want to go down to an Eric Cressy or a Bobby Stroop at APEC or an Exos or whoever it is. Like I trust that these are the best trainers in the country, or Diesel down at Phil Whalen down at Diesel. I mean, there's so many really high quality trainers out there. If you want to invest in yourself to be able to do that, then that's where the investment conversation begins. Because the reality is, there's no investment that you're going to make that is going to be able to deliver the type of returns that hitting a curveball out of the ballpark can have, or throwing a 100-mile-an-hour fastball on the black. There's nothing that you're going to go out there and be able to make $30 million a year. So that's where we kind of start the investment conversation, is investing in yourself.
Yeah, you talk about investing in yourself, and you talk about, I think everybody wants the get rich quick type deal, the private equity. Hey, I'm gonna get in this company,
Yeah.
and it's gonna make me a lot of money. Let's really be honest. How many times guys are pitched on things that have no merit just because they know you
Oh,
have money. And the problem is you're spending your money on
that's
that
right.
versus, you can maximize yourself as a major league baseball player. If I want to look at a private equity deal, or I want to look at, where am I going to go to look for that? Why am I being pitched by this person instead of somebody else? How do I actually source that? And I know this is something that we're going to touch on
Yeah.
in other podcasts, and have some other topics of discussion and resources for guys. But
Yeah.
um, go ahead and touch on it a little bit right now, since we're kind of going down that road.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's funny because, you and I were having the conversation last week when we were in Florida and talking about guys that want to do timber. There is always a time and place for a specific investment. And the reality is, when you can afford it, that's the right time, place for it. And what I mean by that is, when you're in the minor leagues, we can really we can really forecast what your income is going to be like for the next 8 years if your career goes perfectly, right? We know that your first year is going to be
Yeah.
$100,000. We know the second 2 years is going to be half of what you ultimately signed for minus the 100,000. And then we know that depending on when you get to the big leagues, it's, call it 550, 560, 570, and then there's arbitration, and that's kind of the one question mark. But even then, we can systematically start jumping up what those numbers are. And I liken it to kind of the champagne tree. Everybody's seen the champagne tree, and so what we want to do, just fundamentally, is start thinking through. Okay, I know that it's going to take me 3 or 4 years realistically, probably, to get to the major leagues. Unless you're maybe Andrew Vaughn, who might break the camp this year, it's going to take the average person probably 3 to 4 years. And so, what we don't want to recommend ever, whether it's with us or you go with somebody else, is locking up more money than you can afford to live on over the next couple of years. And
Yeah.
locking it up would be even investing it in public markets, because we all know that now, especially COVID and things like that, are a reality in the market. The other thing that we know is volatility is actually a really normal thing. But what you don't want to do is start having to need some of this money at a really bad time. And that's just on the public side. The private side, it gets even more difficult, because now all of a sudden you're locking money away that you can't access for as few as 5 to 7 years, as many as 10 to 12 years. And so, you know, again, I go back to, and I want to reiterate
I don't
this
think anybody
because,
talks about the
you know,
risk either.
especially in the last year, yeah, I mean, the risk is obviously there. But I mean, the thing that, especially in this last year of COVID, people have been searching for these fun deals. You hear about the Bitcoin and the GameStop and Ethereum and all this stuff, and whether those are good investments or bad investments over time. What I would stress to you is, make sure that you're with your wealth strategist, your wealth planner, your financial planner, and make sure that whatever investment that you have fits into two categories. Number one is it appropriate for me now and over the next 5, 10, 15 years? When you use money is just as important as how you use money.
No, absolutely. I agree with that. And that's something that guys don't look at. They look at it as, I have the money, let's go spend it. Whereas it should be a tool to accomplish what you want to
Yep.
accomplish in your life. And it should also be an insurance hedge against your career not going the exact way you think it's going to go. And I think that's a hard part for a lot of guys. You talk to the reason why guys are big leaguers and are really good big leaguers is because they have that belief in that it's going to go right. They're the best. They're always going to be the best.
No
That's
doubt.
just how they're wired. The problem is when you talk about the financial side, trust me, it's really hard to talk to a guy who just got drafted and say, hey man, it's going to take you 4 or 5 years to really, if things go really well, to establish yourself as a
Yeah.
big leaguer. And it might take 6 or 7, and it might not happen at all if there's an injury or whatever it
Yeah.
is. So we can't sit there and say, hey, 3 years, 2 years, you're going to be in the big leagues. We're going to take a step back and be a little bit more cautious, because there are variables out there that nobody can account for that we know are going to come up and are going to happen, whether it's an injury, whether
Yep.
it's a COVID, whether it's you get stuck in an organization with an extreme amount of depth at your position, and
Yeah.
you
Imagine
are
if you're the
down for an
shortstop
extra
behind Derek
year.
Jeter.
Yeah, what are you going to do? I mean, you think he's going to retire, and then he's still playing. You think he's going to retire, and I
No,
remember there
well,
was a
I bring that
player.
up because that guy ended up suing or putting a lawsuit out there. Yeah.
I remember there was a player, and I mean, I won't even mention the name, but it was probably 2006, 2007, and you're reading, it said the heir apparent to Chipper Jones at third base. And the heir apparent at Chipper Jones at third base
Hmm.
was
Poor guy.
probably in middle school at that point, and it was just like, what
Was
do you
Chipper
do in that
Jones hitting
situation? Well,
left-handed or right-handed?
didn't even matter. It didn't even matter. So, yeah, you
Yeah.
in those situations, you just have to you have to prepare financially for the worst, and it's hard to kind of segment that out. But financially, that's why you put a plan in motion. You understand what it is, and you go about it in a very systematic way with
Yep.
somebody in a group of people that understand your career.
Yeah. The reality is it is your younger, maybe it's even your 18-year-old self's responsibility to look after your 40, 50, 60, 70-year-old self. You're laying the
Oh yeah.
groundwork, you're laying the foundation today. And ideally, yes, you do sign for a large enough amount of money today that if you do it right, you're going to set yourself up for life. But if that's your responsibility today. And so what I would stress to you is take advantage of that opportunity. Baseball, especially, there's a really short window for you guys to be able to take advantage of that. And so start being proactive and planning for that is the first way to go from playing the baseball as a game to playing the game of baseball as a business. It is absolutely a business. It can be a very lucrative business, a very fun business, but don't let it fool you. It is absolutely a business. So, Will, is there anything else you want to hit on before we let everybody go today?
No, just I think everybody, as far as the season's going, there's a lot of season left to be played. Guys, don't get down if you're not where you want to be with your stat line or your health line or whatever it is. We have 3.5 months, almost 4 months till the draft. So peak at the right time, understand what's going on. If you have questions, reach out to whether it's your advisor, slash agent, or somebody else in your baseball community, or even reach out to us and ask questions. But enjoy the process, enjoy the moment, and good luck with the rest of your season.
Yeah, for sure. Guys, thank you so much for watching today. We really do want this to be the premier space for you, the next generation of MLB players to get the financial insights that are appropriate for your situation from people that have been in your shoes. If you found today's episode helpful, please just take a quick minute to hit the thumbs up and the subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube, or if you're listening to this on iTunes or a podcast, if you'll give us a 5-star review, that'll really just help us to get this content out to the athletes like you that are asking the same questions. And also, what questions do you want us to answer? Leave a comment on the YouTube below, or even better, email me at Travis at awmcap.com or Will at awmcap.com. We'd be happy to get those back to you. And lastly, we have a lot of really helpful content out there for you. So if you'll just click on the playlist box at the top of the video to see more answers to the biggest questions you guys have, and we'll certainly get that stuff back to you. So thanks for listening. And as always, stay humble, stay hungry, and always be a pro.